has changed. All this is good for reading, but the basic reading for today is the measure itself, the provisional measure. Also, the report written by the team of Senator Gereissati, who prepared a report to Congress, to the combined commission which is going to analyze the measure. Silvana, so we have to change the required reading, okay? This is not the required reading for today, okay? What we have to put here is what you sent by email to them and you put in e-class, which is the provisional measure, the report, and something else, I forget. In the presentation that Pedro is going to give. Yeah, the measure, the provisional measure, the project, which can be found in on the internet. Okay. Gina is kindly going to prepare the summary. Everyone is very curious about Gina's summary. Looking forward to it. And Fabio is going to prepare the glossary. Okay, and we can immediately turn to Pedro to start the discussion, and then Flavio and everybody is invited to discuss. We usually have a break at 8:30 because the restaurant closes at 9, so that people can eat something, and we can continue if you can. I know both Pedro and Flavio have small children, and they may have to put them to sleep. So feel free in the second part. But if you remain, it's fantastic. We can go on and discuss. Okay. Whenever someone wants to ask a question in Portuguese, no problems. Celina, right? Celina will understand that sometimes we turn to Portuguese. In Guto will also understand we turn to Portuguese. Feel free to interrupt and say, I didn't get that. Either in Chinese or in Italian, someone will translate and we can understand ourselves, okay? Pedro, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Mudo por aqui mesmo. Mudo por aqui mesmo. Quer ficar aqui? Não, eu mudo por aqui. Tá, porque dá pra você fazer por aqui. Ah, dá? Dá. Ó, esse aqui você mete aqui, ó.
I forgot to mention. I forgot to mention that we have the honor to have watching this class. The state attorney, Marcelo Aquino, who is very interested in this debate. I take the opportunity to greet Mr. Marcelo Aquino, who is very interested on the subject and is following this discussion also through YouTube.
So, good night. As Gesner mentioned, the main objective today is to discuss the new regulatory framework, the Provisional Measure 868. But before that, I would like to show some information about the water sector in Brazil, some historical aspects and some figures, and also some challenges that we have today in the water sector in Brazil. So with this, we will be all in the same page, and we can discuss the changes in the regulatory framework. So regarding the historical aspects, in Brazil, we first, during the 70s, we had a plan called Planasa. That the main objective of this plan was to create state-owned sanitation companies and to increase especially the coverage of water. We had, in the end of the 60s, during the 70s, lack of water in big cities in Brazil. So this was the main target, to solve this problem during the military government in Brazil. We had a lot of investment at this time, an increase in the indicators, but mainly in the water. Sewage service was still with a very low coverage. The Planasa, Planasa is a national plan of sanitation, ended in the 80s, together with the financial crisis in Brazil. And we spent like 20 years with lack of regulation, low evolution of water and sewage indicators, and a beginning of privatization without a regulatory framework. Okay, this is the second phase. Now, we are in a third phase of this sector. Since 2007, we have a sanitation law that created a regulatory framework. And since 2013, we have a national plan that defined targets for the sector. The main objective is to increase in investment, and we also saw some increase in private participation, but it's still very low in the country. It's interesting because in Brazil, as a federation, we have in Planasa, the planning was defined by the federal level, and they created 27 state sanitation companies to provide the services. It was not mandatory. Some municipalities transferred the operation for the states. Some did not transfer the operation for the states. So some municipalities were still providing services where in these municipalities where there were no state sanitation companies. But in fact, what we know is that the federal government was giving funds only to the state companies. They're not giving funds to municipal companies. So there was a big incentive to transfer the operation for the state companies. Currently, around 70 to 75% of the market is dominated by the state companies. So as I mentioned before, there was some evolution in the indicators, especially in water coverage during the 70s, the 80s, and beginning of the 90s. But the coverage in sewage collection was still very low. After Planasa, 20 years, we have this fiscal crisis that harmed investment capacity. So the federal government was not giving funds anymore to states to invest. This lack of regulation, and what we observed, it's not in all the states of the countries, but in some states of the countries, we observed a management and financial decay of state-owned companies. So we'll see in some slides that some companies have a lot of inefficiency in Brazil, a lot of some state companies. And the indicators did not evolve a lot. So after that, so in the end of the 80s, we have the end of the Planasa, and we started a movement of creating new regulatory frameworks in many infrastructure sectors in Brazil. So during the 90s, we had changes in the regulation of electricity, of telecommunications. So all the infrastructure sectors were changing. In fact, in the case of water and sanitation, it had a late change, only 2007. But also together with all other important changes, as the Concessions Act and the PPP's law. So all this together improved the environment for investments of state companies and of private companies. As you can see, we prepared this comparison between the situation in Brazil, Mexico, and UK regarding the regulation and the planning, how the sector is organized. In Brazil, the owner is the municipalities, and in some cases, municipalities along with states in metropolitan area. This is something that is being discussed in this new provisional measure. In the Mexico, these are the municipalities are the owners, and in the UK, it's national. In the case of regulation, in theory, we can have one regulatory agency for each owner. So in Brazil, we have 5,000 municipalities. In theory, we can have 5,000 regulatory agencies. Since 2007, what you could observe is that usually each state created one regulatory agency, a state regulatory agency, and some municipalities prefer to create their own municipal agency. In some cases, a group of municipalities created a regional regulatory agency. In the end, what we have today is around 50 regulatory agencies, and we don't have standards, and some regulatory agencies are more technical, some are not. So this is one aspect that is being discussed a lot in this new provisional measure, is try to give to the federal regulatory agency called ANA, A-N-A, a role of creating standards for the regulation of water sector in Brazil. Okay, so this is something that was started with the regulation of 2007, the new regulatory framework of the sector, but many people in the sector evaluate that this has to be improved. No? So the idea is to give the federal regulator a role to create standards in the sector. No? Because what we see is that some regulatory agencies are strong, but some are very weak in the country. In the case of Mexico, there is no independent regulatory agency except in some city. And in the case of UK, we have a federal one, Water Service Regulatory Authority of WAT. Planning in Brazil, we have a federal plan. It's called Plan SAB, Plano Nacional de Saneamento Básico. It's the plan that defined the targets for the next 20 years after 2013. So the target today is to achieve universal services in 2033. We have the state level plan and the municipalities plan. The municipal plan is the basis for the contracts between municipalities and private companies and municipalities and state companies. So the first step to have a contract with a private or state company is to have a municipal plan defining your targets. In the case of Mexico, there is a national commission and some municipal commissions. In the case of UK, it's national. Companies, here we have public and private concessionaires. In the case of public, we have some companies that are listed in São Paulo's exchange, like Sabesp, Copasa, and Sanepar. These are big companies. But we also have some companies that are bodies of the municipalities. No, usually in small municipalities, when the service provider is not the state company, it can be a municipal body. Okay, Mexico you have also public and private concessionaires, and in the case of UK, it's divided by 10 private companies depending on the region. It's a case of privatization, the UK. So in Brazil, the main figures, what we have is the target, this is water. Currently, considering the whole country, it's 83% the coverage, and the target for 2033, it's to achieve 99%. In the case of sewage collection, currently you have around 50%, the target is to achieve 92%. In the case of sewage treatment, currently is 41%, so it's not all the sewage that is collected that's effectively treated, and the target is to achieve 86%. Considering that Brazil has 200 million inhabitants, today we have 103 million without sewage collection and 121 million without sewage treatment. Another indicator that is very important, water losses. So considering all that is produced, 37% is water losses, considering physical and commercial losses, 37%. This is a very high number. The target, it's to achieve 31%. We still believe this is a high number, but we consider that something around 20% is a good indicator. Okay, this is just to give you an example that in Brazilians capitals, state capitals, there is a big difference between. So in the case of São Paulo, no, in his city, we have 99% of water coverage and 96% of sewage collection. Another city with good indicators is in Curitiba, in Paraná, 100% of water coverage, 100% of sewage collection, 91% of sewage treatment. But in some other capitals of the country, one example can be Teresina, we have 98% of water coverage, but only 20% of sewage collection. So even in big cities of the country, we still have low coverage. If we see in the Amazon region, Rio Branco, no Acre, we have 55% of water coverage and 23% of sewage collection. So there are mainly two things to improve. One is to increase investments, to increase these indicators, and also to increase the efficiency in the sector. If we talk about water losses, in the case of Porto Velho in Rondônia, we have 67%. So it's very 2/3 of the water is lost. Oh. So it's a big challenge, right? It's a big challenge. We have 100 million people without sewage collection. This is the numbers for the states. So as I mentioned before, this is the urban index, so it's higher, it's 93%, but it's still in some regions like Amapá and Rondônia, it's very low. Regarding the water losses, as I mentioned, there are some states with better indicators, such as Paraná, where Curitiba is located, around 20%. But if we take this Amapá, it's more than 70%. So as you can see, there are many challenges and also many opportunities to increase investments and increase efficiency. This is the number for the sewage collection. So the main idea is to show you that we have very different coverages in the states along the country. Okay, some states are almost with universal services, with full coverage, but some states, in some states, we still have a lot of investments to do. This is the treatment. And this is the market share, okay? If we consider only water, 75% is with the state companies, 19% municipal companies, and 6% with private companies. Before the new regulatory framework of 2007, this number was even lower. But the fact that the sector now is better for private investment, but is still with only small participation in the market. So this is another target of this new provisional measure 868, is to increase investments with an increase in the participation of private companies. Acho que eu voltei. Okay, the state companies are the ones that dominate the market, but as you can see, these are maybe in some cases not the most. What we see is that some companies, especially Minas Gerais, Paraná, and São Paulo, are companies that have a good financial situation, that are publicly traded, and that have a good investment capacity. They're doing investments, and the cities where they are where they operate are improving the services. But we also have many companies in a very difficult situation. In fact, these companies, Agespisa in Piauí, Casal in Alagoas, as you can see, they have a negative margin. Okay, so in many cases, the the state has to put money in the companies for them to pay electricity, to pay the workers. So, of course, they are not able to invest. And that very low coverage that we saw in the past slides, if they continue to provide the services, that numbers will still also continue because they don't have capacity to invest. This is the situation in some companies. Regarding the private sector, it's spread around the country. We have some important cities such as Campo Grande, Cuiabá, sewage in Recife, Manaus, with private operation, but still around 6 to 80% of the participation. So the main challenges, as I mentioned before, that we have 100 million people without sewage collection and a lot of inefficiency. If we continue with the same level of investments that we had in the past years, it was around 10 billion reais a year, the level of investments that we had in the past 10 years. To achieve the targets that we have until 2033, we have to invest around 20 billion reais, so the double. If we continue in the same level that we had in the last years, or 10 billion reais, it will take 20 years more. The targets will be achieved only after 2050. So this is the main challenge now. We had a situation where part of the companies are investing, part of the municipalities are investing, but a big portion of the country is still with the same coverage, and they are not investing enough. So the trend is to achieve universal services only in 40 years. No? This is an absurd considering what is the target. This is the main challenge. The other challenge is to increase efficiency. Here are the state companies, and if you see, there are 10 water companies with more than 50% of water losses. So there is a lot of space to increase efficiency. It's non-revenue water. Okay, it's the water that uh, the companies can't charge from the final customer, okay? Because there was between the production and the final measure in the customer house, there was either a physical loss, a leakage, or a commercial loss. For some reason, a problem in the hydrometer or something, a fraud, something like that, they can't charge from the final customer. Okay, so non-revenue water is a technical term for water losses. So these are the main figures of the country. It's just to start the discussion. And now, Gesner, we can discuss the provisional measure itself. I don't know if you want to present this or if we how you can do.
I think it's a good idea to go on and present the major aspects of the provisional measure. Perhaps it's a good time to ask if there is any question, any point that someone wants to raise, including those who are watching us. They can send either by Twitter or email or any other form. They can send questions. Rodrigo.
I would like to understand why did you compare Brazil with UK and Mexico, and also why the water losses, the indicator is less aggressive than the others? Because can you show us the last graph? Back forward. One more, yeah, this one, because yeah, it's okay, because this one is less aggressive than the others. I just don't understand why.
It's lower, but it's very, very high. Talking about water losses or non-gravity water, this is extremely high. The world standard would be between 10 and 15%. So you have more than double.
Yeah, no,
Pedro showed, it's very high.
no, I got it. Yeah, I absolutely understand that it's high. I just don't understand why the target is less aggressive.
I think that this is just,
The execution is
this is absurd. The target.
why 31. Why we don't target like 20, 15?
I think that this is absurd.
Okay.
You're right.
Okay.
I think that having a target of 31%.
Yeah, because
It's the same thing as a soccer team say, well, our target is to stay in special division.
yeah, and I also didn't understand because comparing to the other indicators, like to attend everybody with water, we are almost 100. The other one we go to 50 to 92, 41 to 86. So in the last one, the losses is
Let me suggest a possible explanation
Okay.
related to the political economy of this. I think that not enough attention has been given to efficiency and to the operation. And a lot of attention has been given over the last decades, right? A lot of attention has been given to constructing new water systems, constructing new treatment plants, because this involves a lot of capex. But this involves efficiency, management, operation, and this is not our tradition. I don't know whether you would.
It's similar to what you said, but when we discuss the budget in the company, we face a decision that is, we may choose to expand the services to the ones that don't have it, or change part of the assets that would bring down the water losses. So between these two decisions, usually you choose to expand the system, and I believe this 31 is because of this. The money is short, so if we choose to do something, we prefer to bring water and collect the sewage, and in the second step, to reduce water. This is not necessarily good, because bringing the water losses down increases your revenue. So you may generate resources to attend people. But politically, it's not so easy. I will change this piping instead of bringing water to another household. That's not immediate.
Is included in this loss? You know, yeah, because when I was in Manaus, for example, we measure exactly the water that we provide to the customers, that we bill, you know. But, for example, I have some friends that worked with me at Manaus that has been working in Sabesp before, and they told me that at Sabesp, for example, the water you provide, you know, for poor people, that is called the social water, it's not included in this measure, you know. So if I can, for example, measure how much water I provide for a neighborhood, and that neighborhood is a poor place, you know, I can charge it from the municipality instead of charging from the customers, and I take it out from the measure. So when you compare Manaus losses, that is the highest in the country, with, I don't know, the smaller one, what I'm trying to say, that's probably is not standardized, you know. When I worked in telecommunications, it's completely standardized and is also automatically measured. You know, when you make a call in the network, you have a call detail record, and you can automatically control all the flow to see how much you lose from that time, from the time you bill a phone call. So it's around 3–5% in telecommunication, but it's strictly, you know, really, really measured. I think that in water, we have, in sanitation, we have the challenge to make a standardization of how we measure it and what we take it out from the measure. And after that, I think that we have to improve the way we measure it, because I think it's really, how can I say, poor, not automatically done, and I think there's a lot of space to increase, you know, the real numbers. I don't know if I can explain myself.
It's a self-declaration of.
Yeah.
It's you know, companies say, well, we lost X%, but yeah, but many people may be even higher than Manaus, and we don't know.
I don't know what I'm trying to. I'm not telling that is right or wrong. What I'm telling is that when we compare, I think we should have a standard, so we can say that we are talking for the same things, you know, because, for example, when I was discussing with the operation director, and he tells me, well, I have smaller losses this month. I ask him, I don't agree with that, because you use the same electricity, use the same, you know, chemical products. So I think that the measure is not really correct. What I'm trying to say is that in sanitation, that is not what happens in telecommunication, for instance. We have to standardize the way we measure, and we have to probably, in an engineering way, have more efficiency to measure first, after we decide how much investments we have to do to have less water losses. I don't know, you know?
I agree entirely. I think that we have many measures. When we first got to Sabesp back in 2007, yeah, no, at Sabesp in 2007, the first thing I asked was, what's our loss? And we wouldn't have a number. Remember that? We would not have a number, because engineers of Sabesp would not agree among them which was the number. And the ways to measure were totally different. So I think it's crucial to have a measure.
You know, as working with revenue assurance, and I know that it's completely automated, you know, when you do like in Oi and Telefonica, we really know how much we lose, you know, because it's, you know, there are a lot of systems doing this. When we compare in sanitation, is really, really poor. You know, it's really physical. I mean, like you told, we have a lot of network, we have a lot of sewage stations, but we don't have systems to make the really, how can I say, control of this, to have the really control of the system. We have to really improve this. When we compare it with telecommunication, it's something like 100 years.
In taking the advantage first of Gina's knowledge of telecommunication, we are lucky to have her here. In tell us a little bit. We are going to discuss telecom next Monday, but why don't you tell us what is the nature of loss in telecom?
It's really complicated, but I'm trying to. Okay, I will try to resume. You know, we have. Okay, yeah, yeah. Okay. Okay, in telecom we have two kinds of revenues. You know, the one you bill for the customer, and the other one is what they bill from each other. For example, when I do a phone call from this telephone, from his telephone number, my phone is Claro, okay? So the CSP of Claro is 15. No, it's 21, sorry, 15 is Telefonica. So if I use 21, 15 I have to pay for Telefonica for this phone call. So I charge him 3, and I pay 2 to Telefonica because I used her network. So we have two kinds of revenue, okay? The first revenue, that is one that we charge from the customer. Business to customer and business to business, yes. The first one, when we call a customer, okay, we made a file called call detail record. This call detail record, for example, you cannot bill what is less than 6 seconds, for example, but you made the phone. But you cannot bill it from the customer, you know? So you lose this, is the first one. After that, you have a system called the mediator that he make a kind of filter to see, for example, if there's no fraud, this kind of things. And it takes more, something more, you know? And after we bill the customer. So if the system is really good, because there's a lot of call detail records, so it's something like you have to process, I don't know, processamento do sistema, you can lose during the processing. Okay, this is the first one. The second one is really fraud. For example, when I use, remember when we have telefone público? So if I use a phone, public phone, okay, to call you, but I use 31 here from São Paulo. 31 is Oi CSP, okay? But I made a fraud in this telephone. So who is gonna pay Oi? Nobody. But Oi had.
Just like stealing water.
So, for example, when I first moved to São Paulo, I lived in a house of a person of my friend, and I worked at Telefonica at the time, and the bill never comes. I said, "What's happening?" Because I make phone calls from my house. Why I didn't have a bill? So when I went to Telefonica, because I worked in this place, and I asked them what happened with the bill, and my phone in Telefonica was a public phone. This is fraud. So nobody charged. Yeah, I was responsible. I said, please take it out from here. I'm going to lose my job. But this is the way that we lose revenue, you know, because I made a lot of phone calls.
It's equivalent to changing the meter so that you don't get a water bill.
Or for example,
It was on purpose.
Oh, okay. Well, I know.
yeah. Or for example, remember when we have a charge for having, you know, mailbox in the phone when you call? Yeah. Sometimes you have it in the network system is already installed, but it was not billed because the system, they don't talk to each other. So you have something that you provide at the network, and you have something else at the billing system. So you lose revenue in this way. It's a lot of,
Some commercial losses, right?
yeah, but
But sanitation have physical.
the difference is that is everything automatized. You know, so you have, how can I say, you have a lot of reports telling you in every step of the flow how much you lose and why you lose. So maybe everybody here, for example, have billing that you make phone calls 90 days ago, and today it appears in your bill. Said, whoa, I don't remember I did this phone call. It's because somebody had made a recover, you know, from one system to another, and find out that those phone calls were not billed. But it's automatically. And if you compare a company with another, it's standardized. You're telling exactly. No, it's exactly the same. You know, because we have to tell Anatel, they have a lot of standards, they make audit to see if we are informing correctly. In sanitation now, that probably with Anna, I think we have a lot of things to do more than this thing, but probably we're gonna get through this also.
Last week, some people asked me what to choose as a topic for a paper. This is a very good topic. How to measure more accurately water losses in different infrastructure sectors. A comparison between water and sanitation and telecom. Yeah, but my suggestion, my suggestion is that you compare two, electricity and water. You have many combinations. It's permutation. But that would be a good idea. In recommendations for the regulator, how to measure it more accurately. That would be good.
An executive that worked in the private sector in sanitation, and she also had worked in telecommunication. I was with Teresa. Yeah, she worked in telecommunication for a long time, okay? And we met in Brasilia, I think 15 days ago, and she told me, look, Gina, it's gonna pass the same thing. Remember what we do when telecommunication was privatized? We're gonna do the same, exactly the same. And when I read Tasso Gereissati report with, you know, the structure they are trying to design to do the privatization, I think it's the same. The same. Exactly the same.
Very good. Very good. Pedro. Okay. Shall we go to the provisional measure? More questions? Oh, sure.
I just want to answer the question of Rodrigo, but just after that we talk more about telecommunication. From my perspective, I think if I were Brazilian government, I would certainly do the same thing, because it is the loss of water distribution is not the most urgent or most biggest challenge in water problem in Brazil. As we know, Brazil has 13% of fresh water, so it is has more fresh water than any other countries. So if we have a good sanitation, we can totally solve the problem of the water. And for governments, what's more important is that people have the access to water, but nobody will care about how much percent we lost if we are not researchers, so that they can get more supportive support from the people. Also, for the distribution, I'm thinking about construction that Brazil is doing is to convert water from one region to another region. I think at the beginning, it usually has some like problems of the loss of water because of the technologies or other things in the construction. I don't know if it is the same, but in China it has something about that. For example, in the Amazon basin, Amazon River basin, it has like 81% of water, but only 5% of population. So we will think about it is so really enough for the 5% population, and will convert the water to another region. So in the process, maybe we have some loss of the water, but if it can solve the problem of the population of other regions to get more access to water, the loss of water is not the big problem. I don't know if you get my point that the total water is really enough.
Yeah, I get your point, but I think I know that the Amazon basin is in fact very impressive and so on, but on average, we do have a lot of water, on average, because the variance is enormous. If you come to this area here, the metropolitan area of São Paulo, water is tremendously scarce. There's very little water in this place here, considering population density, considering the pollution. So we do have a major problem of water scarcity in many regions of Brazil, despite the fact that we have areas in the middle of the country, in the northern states, which are very rich in terms of water. But it's still, I think that it's crucial to be more audacious in terms of targets of reducing water losses. Of course, for the northern states, it's reasonable to say that probably the targets are higher. So we can lose more in the northern states than in the southern states, but still much less than the numbers that we have.
If you lose a lot of water, you have less productivity, you have more costs, so you have a higher tariff for the customer. So this is a problem also, huh?
Nature resources, usually Brazilian government doesn't care much about, because we are only think about in Brazil, if you are in an international perspective, considering if you have very, very limited nature resources, the first thing is not to how to get it, but how to save it, how to use it for all the people. So I mean that for Brazil, maybe it is not the most urgent problem. Maybe the first one is how to be more clean, how to get more clean water for all the population. The loss of food or water in Brazil is much higher than other countries, because actually we don't have a very, very urgent problem for that. So there's no like legislation or policy for many years from my perspective, but I don't know if it is true for Brazilians.
Maybe in Australia, it would be otherwise.
In Australia?
Maybe in Australia, the priorities would be otherwise. It's all about priorities here.
Okay, so shall we continue? Provisional measure? Okay, Rodrigo? Okay. Okay, going back to the question.
No, it's just the interesting of Mexico is that it's similar to Brazil as a country and the organization itself, and the UK is the place, UK and Chile, where they did privatization of the sector. So it was interesting to compare with these two countries. I believe the original research we also compared with Colombia and Chile, but this is just a sample of this comparison, okay? But UK for the privatization of the sector, total privatization of the sector, and Mexico for the similarities with Brazil, okay? So first topic of the new regulatory framework, it's about the regulation of the sector. What we have now is that we have more than 50 regulatory agencies to regulate the concessions, including concessions to private companies and state companies, with state regulators, municipal and regional regulators. And there is clearly a lack of technical capacity in these agencies, what causes difficulties in regulatory discussions. One example is the discussions regarding rebalance process or tariff revisions. We know of some states, we are aware of some states where a discussion regarding tariff sometimes takes 2, 3, 4 years, because in the end, the body, the technical body of the regulatory agency they don't have enough experience or sometimes knowledge to discuss that tariff revision. It's a technical issue. And it's different from what Gina mentioned about the telecommunications. Anatel, it's a single agency for the sector in Brazil. They have many technicians, a tradition, a good technical body. So what you see that in some states, such as São Paulo, there is a strong regulatory agency with a technical body. They also have some problems, but they are evolving and they are in a very different level from what we see maybe in some cities in the country, in some others of these other 50 regulatory agencies. So this is a risk for the investor, either a private investor or a company from the government, if we don't know what will be the results of the regulation. So the idea of this new regulatory framework is that the federal water agency, the National Water Agency, ANA, will issue national reference standards for the regulation of water and of the water and sanitation sector. So they will not regulate each concession, but they will define reference standards for the regulation of tariff, of how to define the compensation for the remuneration of investments made by the service provider. So they will define rules or references to increase the regulatory certainty in the sector. And one of the, how this will be implemented, so as if it's not the regulator itself, it's only an agency that will issue national reference standards. The main incentive is that they will associate the funds that government do give for all the municipalities to be accomplishing with these national reference standards. Okay, so this is the main incentive. So if you are not following the standards prepared by ANA, then you won't be able to receive a financial some funds from federal government, including the banks. Okay, in Brazil, the main investments it's done by Caixa and BNDES, no, the main providers for the investments. And the idea is that the centralization of regulation aims at adding more quality to regulation, thus increasing the legal certainty in the sector. Okay.
What happens to the more than 50 regulatory agencies after ANA starts providing these reference standards? Will they coexist?
Good question.
In the long term, I think they're gonna reduce in the long term.
Yes,
First place,
at first they do.
They should coexist for a while.
At first, yes, but there will be an incentive for them to creating these standards or to following these standards, because without that, there will be no funds for the municipality that they regulate. Okay.
Still have regulatory power.
Sorry?
Will they still have regulatory
Yes, yes, they will have the regulatory power.
ANA is not regulating anymore.
It's just
It's
the
only
standard.
publishing the standards.
The standard.
The decision still.
It's still on the 50 agencies,
Yeah,
decentralized.
maybe instead of 50, maybe we can have 25, 27, because some municipalities will realize that they don't have a body to have one regulatory agency. They will prefer a regional or a state one.
One of the challenges here is that the company cannot get funds from the federal government. One challenge here is that the company cannot access to funds, to federal government funds, if its regulatory agency do not follow the standards. It's not the company; it's regulatory agency.
So it's the standard followed by potential funding.
Yeah, I think it's the main incentive is to access funding.
That's a major incentive.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's the power that because as I mentioned in the beginning, in the end, the owner of the service is the municipality. The state is mainly the service provider, no, with the state company. But the funds are in the federal level. So the main power that the federal level has is regarding the funds. They say, oh, you won't have a fund if you don't adopt the adequate regulation. It's the way they have to incentive the improvement of regulatory aspects. It's different from the UK, where the owner is the federal level. So it was easier to do the privatization. And it's different from other sectors in Brazil, such as telecommunications and electricity, where the owner is also in the federal level. It's also easier to do the regulation in this case. In practical terms, I don't think it won't be very easy, right? Because how to define these reference standards and how to create the adequate incentives, because as Flavio mentioned, in the end, the company will suffer that, no? Will suffer the consequences. This is the most polemic aspect of this new measure. Currently, municipalities can sign contracts with state companies. As I mentioned in the beginning, we have 27 state companies, one for each state. It's not 27, it's around 25. But we have Sabesp in São Paulo, Sanepar in Paraná, Copasa in Minas Gerais. And they can sign contracts with the state companies without a tender process. They can have an agreement, in Brazil it's called program contract, and they can operate without a tender process. So currently, as I mentioned, state companies have around 70% of the market, with private players around 12% of the market, and municipal companies 18%.
Contracts for the state to operate the municipal level water system? Or contracts about what?
No, one example, São Paulo, the municipality of São Paulo. The municipality of São Paulo signed a contract with Sabesp without a tender process, without a licita, to operate the municipal system of water and sewage. This is for all the municipalities where the state companies operate. This is the current rule. The new regulatory framework, the possibility of signing a program contract was eliminated. So there is an obligation from municipalities. This was changed, but now they have to do a tender process to operate with a private company or with a state company. Okay, this is the main change of this new regulatory framework, and this is the main fight between some states and the private players. It's a big discussion because the state companies, they argue that they operate big municipalities, but also very small municipalities, and they do what they call as a subsidize between small municipalities and bigger municipalities. There is a big discussion around this. So if this pass in the future, the current contracts will remain, but in the future, one example, if São Paulo when São Paulo terminates the contracts with Sabesp, they will be obliged to do a tender to contract either Sabesp to continue operating the services or another player. The only exception is if the municipality wants to do the water service and the sewage service by itself. Then it's not necessary a tender. But if you want to have a state company as a service provider or a private company, then you necessarily do a tender.
Sorry, we just said if this passes, it's not enforced yet?
No, it's under discussion. In fact, the decision. Tomorrow they will read the report. Deixa eu ver se eu tenho aqui. No, they will vote in the commission, but then this will go to Congress, okay, for the decision. Yeah, it's a very important step. Yeah? So May 7, they will vote if this will go to Congress or not, or which aspects.
Yeah, but regarding Fabio's question, correct? Because it's a provisional, it's today, this is valid, although there is a period of time, a 2-year period of time, right?
No, it's only until June 3rd.
No. I mean, suppose that Sabesp's contract with the municipality of São Paulo expired today. You, according to the provisional measure, which is valid today, Sabesp would have to have a tender, right? But the question is there is a 2-year period, right? 3-year, sure. Oh, it's a 1-year period. So there's a 1-year period. There's a lag. So if the contract expires today, there is no need to have the tender tomorrow. Okay.
Have to be a public hearing to see if there is anyone interested in that service.
That's right.
Which is not what the report says.
Yeah.
Has
Yes.
changed this.
Yeah, change.
Yes.
Yeah.
The report now says from June 3rd, there is no more direct contract
Yes.
for
Yeah.
public services.
It's even more audacious
And
in
you
the
know
sense
what
that,
he
yeah.
did? I heard, I'm not a lawyer, so
Okay.
you can tell me if I'm correct or not, but what I heard is that, like, for example, the companies that are traded at the market, okay, they are not public companies, okay? So if the municipality do a contract with the state, and this company of the state is not a public company because it can have stocks, for example, it cannot be done without a tender. It's not constitutional. That's what I heard when I was in Brasilia. You know? You see the argument?
It's an argument.
Yeah.
As Sabesp has 49% private capital.
Yeah, so that's why, for example, it's not okay, for example, for a company that's all public. But a company that has stock options, you cannot provide a service without a tender because you have,
That you are facing private capital from inside and
Yeah.
inside Sabesp also private capital.
Yeah.
With different conditions.
And what I heard, if I understood correct the report, the contracts that are inspired, that are already inspired, that are some, I don't know how many, those have to go to tender, The other one that are not inspired, you can They have a period to make a change for a real concession contract and put the, the goals. Because some contracts have no goals.
According to the report, it's not mandatory that you do that. You may stick to the contract that you have to do.
And do you know what well, I'm telling my own opinion here, okay? Do you know what I heard about a lot of investors? If all the contracts do not stay valid, the companies have no value.
Yeah.
So that's why they stay valid.
Yeah.
You see?
And that would be prejudice to this sector because the idea is that you privatize some of the companies.
Yeah, that's
So
why they have
if
to
the
stay
contracts
valid.
are not valid,
Yeah,
they don't have
they-
any
they-
value.
a lot of investors told me, look, Gina, what are we going to do with SEDAI?
Yeah, without
Nobody
contracts,
wants SEDAI. With no contract,
Yeah.
the company,
shell.
the value of the company is zero. It's less because I have a lot of debt. Have a lot of debt, So I think it's well designed, I mean, from my perspective.
Uh-huh.
I don't mean to have us all go through legislative proceedings, but as a provisional measure, couldn't just the president enact it? Why is it going through Congress?
Well, because he has, after a period of time, it has to be ratified by Congress.
Oh, okay.
It's only provisional. It remains valid for
Provisional
6
in
months.
nature, yeah.
Okay. Hey, it expires if not approved by the Congress. This is the problem.
Was made once, the Congress did not vote, so it
Expired.
lost validity, and then was acted another time.
Okay. Any more questions?
Yeah, the third aspect that is the one that Gina's mentioned, that is the the case of the privatization of state companies. So currently the federal government is studying a possible privatization of some companies in the country. They are studying the case of SEDAI in Rio de Janeiro. They are studying the company of Pará, Cozampa. So they are studying a possible privatization of these companies. So currently, in most of the cases, if a state company is privatized, the contracts with municipalities will no longer be valid. No? This is in some contracts. This is even written that if the company is privatized, then the contract is finished. So there is a relevant legal uncertainty for the case of privatization of state companies. In the new regulatory framework, the idea is that they can keep these contracts between municipalities and state companies in the hypothesis of selling the control of the state-owned sanitation companies. Of course, all the municipalities that have contracts with the state companies, they will have to agree with this if the company is sold. Okay, but there is a way to privatize companies, keeping the contracts that municipalities have with state companies. This is also a very important aspect of the provisional measure. So as I mentioned, BNDES is studying possible partnerships in 7 states, including possible privatization of SEDAI. Sabesp is also evaluating a possible privatization. And the provisional measure 868 gives more legal certainty in the case of a privatization. Okay?
We had made a relevant fact 15 days ago, telling that they're doing reorganization, societary reorganization also.
It's a group that will study either
Yeah, it's public, huh?
privatization. Yeah, it's public.
Yeah,
It's public. It's a group that will study either the privatization or what they say just capitalization. Yeah. It really depends on the results of the
What's the composition of the group?
It's Sabesp CEO and then the Secretary of Sanitation, Meirelles, and I'm not sure about,
Okay.
but it's about 6 or 7 government level.
Okay.
So these are the three main aspects of this new regulatory framework. So to give more power to ANA as a regulator, to finish with the possibility of municipalities and state companies to sign contracts without a tender. And the third one is to create a way to have the privatization of state companies. But there are many other aspects that are in this provisional measure. I just mentioned some here, but we can discuss others. One is the regional service provision. The states were given the competence to establish municipality blocks to generate gains in scales. Ownership in this case may be exercised either by the state, either by a public consortium, or by an interdepartmental governance structure, or a governance structure with many players. Another aspect is the sub-delegation. It was created a limit of to 25% of the contract value in the case of sub-delegation. So if I have a contract, I can have a sub-delegation of 25% of this country. And there was also, in the case of landfills, Gesner, if you want to talk about it, the municipalities allowed to establish the deadline for the end of landfill uses. This is something, let's say, new here also. It's not about water and sanitation, but it's regarding landfills.
Microphone. Yeah, people are
Something-
complaining from the United States here. that they
Sorry. It's people, they are obliged to use the sewage service, I think. Is reinforced. This is really important because people don't want to use the service.
Yeah, they are obliged now to pay,
Yeah, to pay.
either if they connect their households or not.
Yeah.
That's an important change, yeah.
In some cities in Brazil, Jean and Flavio can complement, but we have a problem that we have the sewage network, we have the infrastructure, but the people don't connect. Okay, so you made the investment, made all the capex, but people don't connect. Why is that? Because people face two problems. That's in their view, personal view. First, if they connect, their bill will increase. In many cases, it would be double. No, if they pay 50 reais for the water, if they connect, they will pay 100 reais. The other problem is that in some houses, you need to do some civil works. It will have a cost for the family. Okay, what Flavio mentioned is that with this new rule, the idea is that if you connect or if you don't connect, you have to pay. You have to pay because you have the availability of the service. And this is important to create incentives to increase the sewage coverage, right?
Okay, how about private? Okay,
I'll take the mic. Sure. What about private? A condominium or a house, you just dig a hole in the ground, get water from it. I think is it legal, illegal? To what extent can the water and wastewater company regulate that or intervene on that?
It's a good question. It depends, okay? Because the law allows that in certain situations, if you are isolated area of a condominium, you can have your own system. You can have an isolated system, okay? This is allowed in the law. But if this is in the area where the concessionaire is the service provider, and if the network arrives there, then you have to connect, okay? So it's legal. You have to ask for all the licenses to see if the water quality is good or not. But you have to keep in mind that if you have the public service network there, then you have to connect, okay? But it's allowed to have, if you are in an isolated area, and you can have your own system, an autonomous system, okay? One big case in Brazil, here in São Paulo, is what I don't know if you know, the Riviera de São Lourenço in Bertioga. In Bertioga, you have the main system that is operated by Sabesp, but you have this Riviera de São Lourenço. They have an autonomous system of water and of sewage. It's an independent system. And if you look at the municipal plan of Bertioga, they say they have two systems. One is the main system of Sabesp, and the other is an isolated one made by this condominium, okay? And in many cities, we have these situations.
Flavio, do you
Yeah,
want to
there is-
comment the
there is
provisional
one-
measure?
Yeah, there is one very interesting aspect that is in the report that was not in the provisional measure, which is the obligation to pay the investments that are not amortized in case of one concessionaire leaves the service.
Interrupting the concession?
Yeah,
or
exactly.
this,
This is a major evolution because today you have so much risk when you invest in the sector. Because if you leave the concession, the public, the municipality would pay you when what we say is a precatório, which is a public title, a public debt bond that would be paid 20, 30 years after you leave the service. So this is a major risk today. And the tax now is changing. It has paid before you leave the service. This is very important to attract capital to the sector.
But I think there is an article in Law 11445 saying that, right? Stating that. It's already in the law, no?
Not really. Not really.
No? You mean it leaves room for different interpretations?
It does. The sanitation law changed the 8987 law,
Okay.
stating that it has to be paid. But that same law states na caducidade, the payments should be paid before. So when the courts, they analyze these two sentences, they say, well, when it's before you leave the services, it's written. Na caducidade, it's written. All other situations, so it's not before you leave. It's after you leave. And then you have to face the
Okay.
lawsuits that takes 20, 30 years.
Okay.
Now the report is proposing to change. Now it's in all occasions, if you leave the services, the payment is before you leave.
Okay. Yeah, this is very important. Otherwise, there's no incentive to investment. No, this is crucial.
I understood that also the idea is that ANA will give the standards, no? They will give the references
Also,
to
very
calculate.
important. Very
the-
important.
yeah.
Another source of risk today is that there is no standard how to calculate the value to be paid. And now ANA is going to, this is also very important.
No, this, I think that this provisional measure might be a very important incentive for investment. No? It might change the sector. So it will. But of course, who knows what Congress will decide? But I think that it's quite important for investment. As we promised in the beginning, I think that it's a good time for a break, and we continue beginning at 9 o'clock. We continue. Okay. our discussion. May we start with questions? Perhaps there. Do you have any question about the first part? Have you decided the topic of your paper? Yeah. Andrei, have you decided the topic of your paper? Today we had some good suggestions. For instance, Gina suggested we study how to measure losses and compare measurement of losses in different segments. Gucho, do I pronounce correctly? Gucho, have you decided what to write? Would you like some suggestions? In water and sanitation, and then I asked Pedro and Flavio if they have suggestions of questions to be answered in water and sanitation, because my suggestion to people who are taking this course is to choose a topic that answers a very precise question. Gina proposed a very precise question. What's the difference between how we measure losses in water and sanitation, how we measure losses in telecommunications? In recommendations on how to do it. Any particular topics in water and sanitation that you think that are interesting? Let me propose one topic: how to articulate more water in sanitation with solid residuals. What type of measures could stimulate a greater integration of water and sanitation and solid residuals? I think that could be a good topic. Also, what has to change in environmental legislation in order to speed up the process of investment in water and sanitation? This I know that is a topic that Flavio likes it. Another question: what is the minimum size of a municipality in order to have economies of scale in water treatment and sewage treatment? Gina has led a company in a concession in Manaus with 2 million people, if I'm not wrong. Is it possible to have a water concession, an efficient water concession with 10,000 people? What kind of technologies could be used in remote areas? This is something that Beatriz has been thinking about. What type of technology could be used in order to have less requirement in terms of initial capital for water and sanitation? So those are a few suggestions of questions that could be in a term paper. Your name again is? Luisa. Luisa, have you chosen your topic yet? Not yet. Okay, so I gave some suggestions. Rodrigo. Fabio.
One topic I raised in the first class was navegação de cabotagem. I don't know how that, coastal navigation, so to speak, and potentially, or to get deeper into something, potentially what hinders the integration of from navigation to other means of transportation, road, railway. That could be something, if you have suggestions, further suggestions on that.
That's very interesting. I think that this is perhaps the major problem of our transportation system is lack of integration of the different modes. So that will be a very good paper. Rodrigo.
What I was talking with them in the break is, I don't know if it can turn to a paper, but maybe the position of what you guys are proposing today. I mean, what's the bad points about privatization in the sanitation program, the national sanitation program? I don't know if I can talk about the bad points of the privatization of the sanitation program.
The negative aspects
Negative,
of
yes.
the privatization
Of the
of water and sanitation.
848, I don't remember the number of
868.
868, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the negative
Okay, or major criticisms of provisional measure 868.
yeah.
That could be. That could be. Let me turn to Flavio and Pedro. What are the major negative points of provisional measure 868? If you had the opportunity to rewrite it, how would you rewrite it?
Well, first a suggestion of topic that could be interesting. When we see the process throughout the globe of privatization, many municipalities have came back and restatized the services. And one of the aspects is because when there is a lot of capital flowing to the concessions, the investment increases and tariffs increase to pay the investment, which the public companies do not make, but the private companies do make. That increases the tariffs, and the population goes against the privatization because tariffs increase.
You made a paper
How
about
to avoid this trap in the process? Because that might happen here.
Yeah, I think Pedro had wrote a paper about it.
About this subject.
Yeah,
Yes.
about the subject.
Yeah, you can make a study on this case.
Why municipalities
Take the service
take
back.
the tariff back? Yes.
Yeah, one aspect is this, the tariff.
The tariff increase because investment increase. No? Even if efficiency increases together, but the tariff increases a lot. Now, going to the second question, negative points. I think the main negative point, what I would say is that Brazil made a mistake in '88 when it gave to the municipalities the power of attorney in the sanitation. That created a lot of confusion. The planning is bad, the regulation is bad, and the service provision is bad. What we are doing here is confirming that mistake. We say, well, the municipalities are the power of concessions. And then we try to bring the regulation to the federal level. We try to organize municipalities in groups of municipalities, because the original idea is not good, to give 500 or 5,000 municipalities the planning and the regulation.
Don't you think we have much municipalities that we should do? You know, there are a lot of municipalities that doesn't have money to pay the expenses of the, you know, the employees. So I think we have a lot of municipalities that I don't think they should exist.
Yes,
I think
yes.
this is the
That's the
problem,
original.
the original problem.
I agree.
I heard that, I don't know, I think like 20% of the municipalities in Brazil does not have the money to pay the employees, how can I say, money, you know? Yeah,
The payroll.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So I think this is the problem, in fact.
No, I agree. So what we are trying to do here is to make some corrections because of that original mistake. Well, that's one point. My second critic to this is that public companies have been very active to avoid that this becomes a law. And it's because it will not allow anymore the direct contract to the companies. The argument is that we have today, what Pedro commented, the cross-subsidize between municipalities that are bigger to the smaller ones. In fact, what I think this is correct. Public companies, they are not, at least talking now what I see in Sabesp. Public companies are not trying to avoid competition. They are trying to avoid that public companies and private companies compete for the only for the bigger municipalities, leaving the small ones to the public government to provide the service. So that's the main point. The report does try to access this, creating the blocks of municipalities, which might work, although I'm not sure if there is enough enforcement in order to the states to really form the blocks. If states are successful forming the blocks, then it's okay. We have blocks that are balanced, and then competition will define the tariff that
I think that
will.
if they do not form the block, the federal government will do, because I think they have 2 years to do it. If they didn't do, I think that the federal government will going to do that. That is what's wrote in the report.
Yeah, but there is a specific paragraph saying that each municipality has to agree to be part of the block. So of course, if I'm giving the money, I will not join the block.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my point. No, the bigger, the largest municipalities will not integrate any block. So that's seleção adversa, what we say.
Can we talk a little bit how we face it with the telecommunication? Because maybe that's
Good
a
point.
problem. Because
That's good point.
in the small cities, we don't have a good network. And the big ones, we have several options.
The telecommunication system, it was privatized in really big, how can I say, states, you know?
Yeah, it's
You have
clusters.
For clusters. For
It's
example,
clusters.
Telefónica has São Paulo, is the best one. When I work in Telefónica, I say that the last mile is the last smile. Because it's, you know. In Brazil, Telecom, I think, have something like 12 or 13 states, and Telemar had the other 20 states, I think. So it's big blocks, you know, and the tariffs they did was they build it in a way to compensate the poor municipalities and the richest one. I don't know if let me try to speak in Portuguese, okay? Quando foi feito a modelo tarifário, de uma forma, você compensa os custos que a companhia tem nos municípios mais pobres, onde ele teve que construir a rede, porque não tinha rede originalmente. em detrimento dos municípios onde já tinha rede e ele tinha que reinvestir. Inclusive, num determinado momento, a Anatel fez um modelo de custo para poder exatamente comparar os custos entre as operadoras, de uma forma também padronizada, até para poder avaliar essa margem, que é o bendito fator de produtividade que a gente não tem muito estabelecido então, não sei se eu expliquei. Então, o preço da tarifa versus o custo,
Yeah,
no modelo se compensa.
I understood, but I mean, I spent the last 2 years in a small city, close here, Araçariguama, 50 kilometers, a famous Portuguese restaurant, and we don't have network there. It's like you know that you should climb that mountain, and then you have a network line, and we don't have internet, we don't have nothing.
I'll try to explain. There's a problem.
I'm sure that we have an explanation. I mean, how we face this with the sanitation. I mean, we didn't achieve the success with the telecommunication. So we are repeating the standard in the sanitation or not?
We are one step back. In telecom, they formed clusters, and one company is responsible to providing services in several areas. The ones that are poor. In sanitation, we are segregating the regions. So we may have competition only for the rich portions. The other ones will go to the public to provide the services. So we are even...
You can regulate it with goals. For example, I remember when I was in telecommunication, we had to provide public telephones. You know, so we go to Alto Paraíso in Goiás. There is nothing, but there's a lot of public telephones because we have a goal to put, I don't remember, 3 telephones at that city. We cannot put 5 telephones in Brasilia and no telephones in Alto Paraíso. We have to put 3 telephones in Alto Paraíso.
So
Is a way to regulate it.
so in your opinion, we made a good work with the telecommunication.
I remember when, you know, look, when I married first, when I had 20 years, how much costs a telephone in Brazil? How many people have mobile phone? Of course, there are a lot of things that we could improve, always. But when we remember what happened with Telebras, I think that we have a complete different perspective. And you know, if we didn't have had advance in telecommunication, we are going to have a lot of problems because now everything is integrated. All the cities, you know, we're going to have another economic problems if we didn't have done the work. Of course, there's a lot of things to improve, but as I remember, Telebras was really bad.
No, I agree. If you see the speed that both sectors have evolved, telecom is far away from sanitation.
I guess the situation that we have in water and sanitation today is a little what we had in telecommunications back in the 80s, before the privatization process, an enormous investment gap. You have half of the population with no sewage treatment. This is something with no sewage collection. So, in more than half of the sewage collected not treated. This is something that's an enormous gap. And you have so basically the public sector is not coping with the problem. So you have to find another solution. No? Well, but the problem that Flavio pointed out was the problem of the small communities.
The object that is going to be target of competition, not the competition, but
Okay.
what are we competing for?
Okay,
Not
so-
clusters, but only the biggest concessions.
Yeah. cream skimming.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the problem. But you could have, you could use part of the money you collect with Rio de Janeiro, you could use for smaller municipalities, no?
Yes, yes. In that way, the report is stepping back. What is now in the provisional measure is that the outorga or the concession fee should be directed to universalization or the service itself. And now it's not this way anymore. The concession fee can be used for anything.
I see. Because you could have the concession fee, like in roads, as we discussed, you could have the concession fee being used to fund a public-private partnership that would not have the resource, so you would pay in using the money from the concession fee.
And what I like the most, the idea that I think should is a fee that everybody pays to a federal fund that is providing the investments in the poor areas. Like yeah, and like the electricity,
Yeah.
because this is interesting for public companies and private companies.
Yeah.
Because you would have a larger number of municipalities that are
Demanding services.
demand services. Today we are going to have competition only for the richest ones. The other ones, we don't have competition at all. If we have a fund like this, more municipalities would be superavitárias.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Any other question? Henrique, Fábio, Celina.
I think we talked another day about this fund. Yeah, for me this is like the best option, the like only option, and I didn't see it being discussed in any of the public audiences, public commissions, whatever. Nobody's talking about it, and it's nothing like not a big innovation. We see that happens in a lot of sectors. In many sectors, why do you think, like, why they're preferring regionalization? That I believe the way they form the blocks of municipalities is not the smartest, like the best way. It's very random, I believe, not totally random. Why do you think we're not discussing it?
I agree with you. The solution that we have today is much more complicated than the federal funding. But I don't know why. I don't know.
Yeah, okay, it's not like we're not in time anymore to go there and just suggest. That's a shame.
How about alternative technologies also for remote areas? That I don't know. Sometimes we always think about universal services, just replicating the systems we have in the big urban centers. Perhaps that will never happen, and we'll just have very much simpler systems in the remote areas. No? Perhaps economically it makes much more sense. That's a possibility. No?
I also suggested in our WhatsApp group, there's a friend of mine that works with alternative like biodigester evapotranspiration and different alternatives, because maybe we face it, and as we are considering this is a long-term project, maybe we have to implement alternative in the small areas, yes. So also I have a friend that came here also and present alternatives with sewage and treatments. I have an experience in Haiti. I went there 2 years ago, and we built a biodigester. It's a personal experience, but it was,
Did it work?
yeah. It took 3 months to produce the gas. It was a school for juniors, 500 children, and we built a biodigester. Was yeah, incredible for me.
I think the private companies can really add to this subject, because what we hear in the public sector is that municipalities that have less than 50,000 are not viable. And what we see is that private companies operating in municipalities that is smaller than this, with sufficient profits, mainly because of technology. So this might be changed because of the new.
I think that the 50,000 story is a big myth.
It is.
It's a big myth. I think that we can find better solutions. Rodrigo, your friend is very welcome to come here and present. Your experience in Haiti would be very interesting. We brought, about 2 years ago, we brought Professor Kartik from University of Columbia. Also, he has some pilots in India, Bangladesh, and other countries. And I think we should look at those experiences and see how some problems of remote areas are being solved with less money than we usually use. I remember some sewage treatments of Sabesp, which were very expensive for very small cities, and you would spend just too much money. It was not rational to do that. It was not efficient. So I think that one could study that. Any more points? Gucho, Andrei, any points? Celina, Henrique, Fábio, Luisa. No? Okay. For next week, we'll discuss about telecom. Pedro, any points that you?
Maybe just about the next steps. So this Tuesday, the report of Senator Tasso Gereissati will be voted on the commission. So we will finally see what will be the final text that the Congress will examine. And they have until June 3rd to have a final approval of the text. So they have to vote in the on Congress until before that. I think they will start this analysis, let's say next week, and they have to vote until June 3rd. If it's not voted, then it expires, and the discussion will start again. So in fact, we'll see this change in the next few weeks, if there is a change or not.
Do we know if the estimates are favorable for the approval of the text of the MP 868?
My personal view, I There's a high probability of a positive vote. If two things happen, some concessions on the part of the government, or so some changes in the text, and also if the political environment, the general political environment, does not deteriorate. Otherwise, I think that not because of the content of the provisional measure, but because some forces would be against anything that the government initiates, that could be a danger. Well, all the public companies are against it. You have thousands of employees of the public companies who are against. You have the suppliers of the public companies, which are used to selling at high prices, low quality products and services, and having a reservation of the market, established interests. You have the political groups who control those companies. So, you know, those companies are tremendous cash cows, and they help politicians to get reelected and elected, in political parties to remain in power. So I think that it's not by chance that there is so much resistance.
Most of the sector is against it. Only the private players are not against it. So there is.
It's because they are smaller, you know. That's why you have a lot of people against and few people.
We were talking about the status quo bias, because people who have benefits from the system know how much they have. People who may receive benefits, which is the population with services and so on, they don't know how to. Yeah, it's not clear what they will they will get.
that's predictable, yeah. But sometimes we have good arguments, like we're caring about the small cities, how we're gonna provide. Sometimes we have lessons learned with the other, like telecommunication. Also, we learn it with them, and we're improving that. So
Yeah.
normally, a few times the opposition have good arguments. I don't know if we are facing it, or just corporativism, like we are caring about our jobs. So it's predictable.
Yeah, that's true. But before last October, when we had the first time it begins to be discussed, nobody's talking about anything, you know. So it's gonna stay the way it is because it's comfortable. So, you know, we are trying to change the balances. That's why people are really, of course, probably we are going to go to a side, and after we're gonna have to come back a little more. You know, that's what I think.
In this discussion, what are the alternatives for Sabesp? Of course, your personal view, we're not talking on behalf of Sabesp, but what are the alternatives? Because Sabesp may be privatized, may not be privatized, may receive capital. What are the different scenarios for Sabesp?
I would say there are two scenarios. The first one is that the provisional measure becomes a law with the changing the contract, the program contract, so that Sabesp from that point on would go to public hearing, or public bids. if that is correct, then there is no sense to remain public. It would be very difficult for Sabesp to compete in the
Because
in the sector.
Sabesp would have to follow the legislation,
Legislation.
and it would have a hard time competing with the private
Yes,
companies.
it doesn't have the speed, it doesn't have the flexibility, it's not feasible. So if the provisional measure goes forward as this, probably privatization is the best option.
So something like selling the control and maintaining a golden share, something like that.
Yes, yes. In the other hand, if that's not the case, then remaining public has its advantages, which is the program contract itself, but also the finance that is that's cheaper, and some other advantage that I would say Sabesp would remain as a public company, although through a new structure, which is to constitute a holding company that would have the Sabesp shares of the government, 50.3%, and government would sell half of this holding, 49% of the holding, so which means the holding remains as a public company, and it holds 50.3% of Sabesp, which is remains as a public company, but the government has got the value for Sabesp. So it's the capitalization, what we say. Those are the two ways that could be
The two scenarios.
the two scenarios.
Basically, in any event, we will have a major transformation of Sabesp.
Yes, that we can expect. Yes.
Before 2020. Yeah. Well, that's in 2020, probably. Yeah. Yeah.
Perhaps this year. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of things happening in the sector.
Today, they begin a discussion in Rio de Janeiro also, yesterday, I think, about what they're going to do in SEDAI again.
Yeah.
But I think they begin to discuss it more seriously.
Yeah.
SEDAI, that they had the great idea to sell the company, but today is not possible. It depends on the law.
I think that Zema had told last week that he's going to change the law because they have a state law that make it not possible to make a privatization. But he did a Twitter,
Yeah.
last week, telling that he's going to change the law to privatize Copasa.
To privatize Copasa, yeah. So a lot of change happening. And all through the Twitter. And I want to thank everybody, and very especially Pedro and Flavio, who again, Flavio has come several times, Pedro also. I think that we owe to them an applause because they contributed a lot. And thank to everyone who followed the class through internet. Hebel with us as our special guest. Okay, and you already have this this book in the e-class.